guys, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, I'm Christy and I'm an avid crafter, DIYer, home decorator, and a mom of two littles, and I love sharing all of that with you. I am super excited about today's video because in this video I'm going to be creating some beautiful farmhouse style home decor on a really small budget. And we're going to do this by using items you would ordinarily throw away. And this is a result of a challenge that is hosted monthly here on YouTube by Casey over at Coffee with My Sunshine. You will definitely want to check out her channel. She is an amazing crafter and DIYer. This month, she also has a co-host, Heidi, over at Heidi Samble DIY, who is also amazing. I will have their channels linked down below. So let's hop on into the first DIY. For this one, I'm going to be using a placemat that I purchased at the Dollar Tree. My trash item is a can. It was a can of chicken. It's one of the larger ones. I cleaned that up and we're going to use it in this DIY. I also have some puffy stickers. These are actually planner stickers, but you could also use buttons or anything that is round and will look like a nail or something like that. You also need a glue gun. And you're going to need a couple of paintbrushes, specifically one of these that is flat. It's a kind of a stenciling foam brush, and that will come in handy. Also, I'm going to be using a chip brush. You can find those at the Dollar Tree. I also have this glass vase that I found at the Dollar Tree, and then a variety of paints. So, first we're going to have this Waverly chalk paint in the color Elephant. This tempera paint in a metallic silver. You can use any metallic silver paint, will work just fine. And then I also have this Waverly wax in antique, and then another Waverly paint, chalk paint in the color mineral. Also going to need this folk art paint in the color burnt umber. To get started on this DIY, we're going to want to clean up this chicken can that I have. You can use any type of can that you want. This just happens to be or was a can of chicken, and it's one of those larger cans. But where I removed the the paper on there, it left this sticky residue, and it was pretty difficult to get off. So I ended up, even though after I washed it and cleaned it up with some dish soap, it still did not want to come off. So I used this razor blade that I picked up at the Dollar Tree to scrape that off of there, and it did take me a few minutes, but it came clean. It was no problem. So now we're ready to paint. And I'm going to start with a couple of coats of the Waverly chalk paint here in the color Mineral. And you're going to want to cover all of the outside of the can. And I'm using a foam brush to do this with. No rhyme or reason here, it's just a little bit of painting. You just give it a good coat, let that dry, and then give it another coat. You want it to be pretty covered. You do not want to see the metal shining through there because we are going to make this look like wood even though it is metal. Now, once your two coats of chalk paint are dry, we're going to go in with the color Burnt Umber, and that's a folk art paint, but any brown paint will work. And what we're going to do is create some faux wood grain. And I'm going to do this by dry brushing it on there. So you can see I wiped some of the paint off. You don't want to go in too heavy. It's better to go on light and build it up rather than to have a really heavy spot on there. Now, keeping in mind, I will go in at some point with a little bit more paint on there to add some thicker lines, but it's always better to just start really light and build up from there. once that is completed and you have allowed it to dry, now we're going to go in with the Waverly Antique Wax. And this is where the magic happens. It all of a sudden, once you apply this, it actually starts to look like wood. So all I'm doing is taking a paper towel and lightly rubbing it on there. So I dip it in the antique wax, and if I feel like I've got a little bit too much on there, I may dab some of it off. But I go in and lightly rub that on. And you don't want to go in too heavy-handed because you can pull off some of the paint. Take it from me, I learned the hard way. I ended up pulling a little bit of the paint off of the top, but I went back and fixed it and you can't even see it. But go in really lightly and rub that on until you have the desired look that you want. You also, if you feel like you get a little too much, you can go back in with the dry part of your towel and take a little extra off. It takes this a few minutes to dry, so you have some time to be able to remove a little bit of it if you need to. Now here is how the end result turns out. But now you can see there where on the top, that's where I pulled some of that paint off. But I go back and I fix it and you can't see it. But you can see here, this is going to become the wooden base for our candle holder. Now moving on to the next step. We're going to be creating some faux metal straps to go around this candle holder. We're going to use this placemat to do that. So I want to start by measuring off how wide I want them to be and how long I need them to be. So to do this, I'm going to get a tape measure. Now this one is specifically for sewing, so it's really nice and flexible. If you don't have one of these, they come in handy with DIYs. But I believe this what measured out to be about 11 inches around, and this placemat was around 17 inches. So that gave me plenty of room to do that, and it actually worked out well because we're going to have two vertical pieces as well that connect, and so I had just enough left over in each strip to do the two vertical strips as well, so it worked out well. But I want to start by removing this rounded edge from the placemat, and I'm measuring here and marking off where I need to cut. So I'm going to first start by cutting off this edge, and then I'll have a starting place for my two straight pieces, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. And all I started by using a razor blade, but honestly I'm not the best at using those, and so I ended up going in with scissors. I thought I could do a straight edge and this, but the placemat was really slick and my ruler just wouldn't stay in place. So I grabbed some scissors and those worked perfectly fine. So whichever method works for you is the way I would go. Now, once I had those cut, I gave them a coat of the Waverly chalk paint in the color Elephant. For some reason, my camera had cut off and I didn't realize it, and I did not get footage of me painting that. But all I did was simply use a foam brush and give it a coat of paint. One coat is plenty because we're going to be adding another coat of paint here. So we're going to start creating this galvanized look with this silver paint. So any silver paint will work, and I'm going to use this flat stenciling foam brush. I picked this up at the Dollar Tree. They usually come in a pack of 2 or 3, I think. And I'm using kind of a pouncing motion to create this look. And what that does, it gives it a really nice texture. And I have several techniques that I use just depending on the surface and that I'm painting it on, so that I get the desired look. So there are times I will do this twisting motion. You'll see me do that here in a second, and it almost gives it the metal look kind of almost like a polished effect. Now be sure when you're painting this that you don't get too much of the silver paint. I made that mistake on here, and so I had to correct it. And if you do, it's really simple. very easy to fix. But you definitely want some of that flat dark gray paint to show through, and that is what truly gives it that galvanized appearance. And so here I'm using a clean paper towel to that's crumpled up to go back and remove a little bit of that paint. If for some reason it still doesn't remove enough of it to let that shine through, you can go back in with the paintbrush that you used to paint the gray on, especially if it's still got some paint on it and it's wet, to add in just little spots of that gray paint. And that will give you enough dimension in the piece to make it look truly like galvanized metal. Now you will want to repeat this process on each one of the pieces, and you want to do this on both sides. So when you go in with the gray paint first, paint both sides, let it dry, and then you're going to want to do this technique on both sides because we are going to be applying it to glass. And you will be able to see the other side. So you want it to have a finished appearance and so that it looks authentic. So now we're going to go in with the color Burnt Umber and this kind of ratty brush that I have, and I like using a brush that's kind of in bad shape. I save them just for these kind of techniques, but this is going to be a faux rust appearance. And a lot of galvanized metal has that rust on the edges where it would get a normal wear and tear on there, and so you want to go back in and apply this to the edges. I think it gives it a lot more dimension and makes it look more realistic. However, if you don't like that rusty look, you definitely don't have to do this step, but for me, I just think it makes it look more realistic. And I'll be honest, my husband was completely fooled by this when it was all finished. He was like, "What is that on there? Is that metal?" I said, "Nope, it's a placemat." He was very surprised. He thought it looked just like metal. So I was pretty excited about that. So anyway, I think that this technique really adds that realistic touch to it. So you're going to do this on all of the edges of every one of the pieces and let it dry before we apply it to the glass. Now it is time to attach the faux metal pieces to the glass vase, and we're going to use hot glue to do this. It is super simple. So what I do is I go around here and make sure that it is going to be long enough, and I actually needed to trim up the end just a little bit. I cut it a little bit too long on purpose just to make sure that I had enough, but just go in with some scissors and trim off what you need to trim off. And then we're going to use just a little bit of hot glue. I apply it to the placemat itself, and it takes very little. Now if you want this to be more permanent, by all means you can attach it with a little bit more hot glue, but I use these glass vases for quite a bit and I wanted to be able to remove it. Now I placed this down just a little bit from the top edge, maybe about a ½ an inch from the top edge, and then I'm also going to go up that same amount, about a ½ inch from the bottom when we apply the bottom piece. Now when attaching the bottom piece, not only do you want to make sure that you are coming up from the bottom equal amount as you did come down from the top, but you want to line up the two seams so that they're in the same place, because we're going to be covering that up with these vertical pieces. So I have those other two shorter pieces and we're going to lay them on top of the horizontal pieces going around the glass, and we're going to cover those seams that we have there with the one piece. Now the stickers I am actually going to end up painting gold and applying them to the top, almost like it has some kind of metal grommet in there to hold it together, although we're just going to hot glue it. So I'm trimming these down to fit the exact size that I need. And I'm just going to use a little hot glue and stick it on there. Now to attach the other side, you can see through the glass, so it makes it pretty easy to get it lined up. And you want to make sure that they are in the same place so that they're evenly on either side of the glass. I hope that makes sense. And I'm using my phone there to hold that glass still, so you may want to use something to hold it in place. That was just what I had close by. So you can see here that they are evenly distributed, and that is kind of what it's going to look like. Now the last step is to paint the stickers, but I wasn't totally sure that's really what I wanted to do, and I took one of them off, or a couple of them off, and stuck them on there just to make sure that I liked the way that looked. And so I did, and I'm going to go in with this metallic paint in the color gold. It's metallic gold, and it's in a Folk Art brand, but any metallic paint would work. But let me tell you, these metallic paints from Folk Art are really great, and they had silver and copper and all kinds of colors, so I think they're great for DIYs. But let me tell you, these were very difficult to get covered. I put 4 coats of paint on here before it actually covered the lettering. So I think that if you used a button or something along those lines for this, you wouldn't need near as many coats of paint. But I was using what I had on hand. And since I had to paint so many coats on here, to speed this process up, I used my hair dryer. And you'll see me use that here in a second to dry in between coats, just so that I could get this done a little bit quicker. And I really was putting a lot of paint on there, but it dried very quickly. But I will warn you, the smell was kind of bad. And I'm not sure if that was from the sticker or from the paint where I was drying it. But I absolutely love how this turned out. It looks so pretty sitting in my living room. I love it. But definitely, if you don't like the gold, you could go with that metal look as well. Now, on to this next DIY. So I had all of these foam pieces left over from another project that you will see in an upcoming video. I'm making a really beautiful lantern, but I cut too many pieces, honestly. I miscounted what I needed, so I had these left over, so I thought I would use them. So you can see I have the placemat left over that we just used, so I'm going to reuse that. And then this is that foam board that you find at the Dollar Tree. You can also pick it up at any craft store as well, but it's really a little bit cheaper at the Dollar Tree. And I had cut out some circles, and then I also have this dowel that's left out of some of my Cricut vinyl. Those are very sturdy, so they're really good for projects, and I try to save them. And then I had some leftover beads from the other project, and then you're going to need some chip brushes and foam brush, and then this Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster, and then the Waverly chalk paint in the color Truffle, and it's just a really dark brown paint. And then of course you're going to need a glue gun, and then you're going to need a some type of utility knife, X-Acto knife or something like that. So, and maybe some scissors. But how we're going to start this is I'm going to go ahead and create the base. So those smaller discs that you see there actually came out of the center of that. Well, I'm going to put them back in because we're going to make a riser or something that you can set a candle on or something like that. So I love using these different risers in my decor, especially if I'm creating a Ray Dunn display or something like that. I like having varying heights. But since I had already cut that out of the center, I needed to kind of cover that up so that you couldn't see that line in there, and I wanted to have a solid top. So I'm going to use this placemat to do that, and I'm just simply laying that on there and drawing around it, and then I'm going to cut it out and glue it to the top of the foam disc, I guess you could say. And I ended up not using my hot glue, and here's why. On another project, if I used a larger amount of hot glue, it seemed to want to melt the mat a little bit. So for this job, since I needed it to stick really well, I'm actually going to use a little bit of super glue around the edges and then just a little bit in the middle, and it stuck perfectly fine. Actually, that's probably better than hot glue, but I didn't risk melting the placemat. Now you can see here I'm gluing that on, and I'm going to set that aside to dry. Now the next part, we want to create some legs for this so that it sits up just a little bit. And I'm going to be using this roll from my Cricut vinyl. And like I said, those are way sturdier than your typical paper towel roll or something of that nature. I mean, these are a lot thicker and a lot more durable. So they make really good legs for things and are great for DIY projects. So I wanted the legs to be about 1 inch each. And so you want to make sure that these are all the same size because you don't want your candle holder to be unlevel. So you want it to be nice and straight and level. So I'm marking off there where I want to cut. And I'm just double checking to making sure I did that correctly. And all I'm going to do is simply cut this with my utility knife. Now you can see here I'm going back in and trimming these up a little bit with some scissors. I am not the best at using these utility knives or X-Acto knives, and so I'm going to have to go back in with the scissors and trim up just to make sure that it is level. And they turn out fine, and that will be really simple. So no worries if you can't get it exactly straight. You can go back and fix it very easily. Once you have your legs cut out, you want to flip over the foam piece and determine the placement of your legs. Now I am using that cut line as a guide because I already had that there, but you may not have that if you decide to recreate this piece. You will want to place the legs back away from the edge just a little bit. You can see there that mine are not directly on the edge, and I'm using that circle as a guide. So maybe a ½ inch back away from the edge is kind of ideal placement for it to look its best. Then to attach the legs, I'm just using a little bit of hot glue and putting it on the bottom of each leg and then putting it back in place where I would like the leg to be. Once the glue is dried on the legs, then you want to start placing your beads. Now I have this groove in there where I had a smaller piece inside there. I had 3 layers of the foam and one was smaller than the outside too. Hopefully that makes sense. It will be more explained, of course, in my upcoming video, so definitely want to subscribe so that you can check that out when I get that one up for you. But I'm going to be putting some hot glue in that little groove and then sliding these beads that I picked up at the Dollar Tree in there, and the glue will hold them in place. I'm going to do this all the way around. I don't know if you guys have seen those risers that everyone's using in especially Farmhouse decor that have those wooden beads around the edges of them. I just love that look, and so I wanted to recreate that with this piece. And I've created several other pieces like that, but with this I really like how the beads are embedded in the piece rather than just being adhered to the outside. I think it looks a lot more high-end and not so crafted or homemade. The next step will be to apply our first coat of paint, and I'm going to be using the truffle color from Waverly, and it is a chalk paint. And I apologize on the footage coming up. I did not realize my camera had cut off on me, and I lost the footage of me well, actually there was no footage of me painting this on the brown, but it's just the Waverly chalk paint and the color brown, and that's what it looks like when I get finished. So once that is dry, and I only did one coat, it's not necessary to get full coverage because we are going back over this piece with this plaster color, which is a slightly off-white color if you've not ever used this plaster color before. It's not bright white, but it's not quite a cream either. It's kind of in between. I really like this color. So we're going to use this chip brush to apply it, and we're going to go in to paint and not have a ton of paint on the brush because we want to give it that rustic, almost dry brush kind of look. So I'm going to lightly go in and brush and kind of build on that. Now, I like to go heavier in the center and lighter along the edges, and to me this gives it a more realistic look, the way that I guess wood would actually age and the paint would wear off, if that makes sense. It's going to wear off around the edges versus the center in most cases, and so for me I like the edges to have the distress on them rather than the center. I hope that makes sense. So we're going to paint the entire piece, including the beads and the underneath as well, and the legs. Now once you have painted this and gotten your desired look and your level of distressed appearance on there, you just let it dry and you're ready to use it. I love how this has turned out. I plan to use this as a candle holder or possibly a riser in some kind of home decor display. I think this will be great this summer as well as moving on into fall. You can use this all year round as well as the other piece. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I love how these DIYs turned out, and I love the idea of using things you would ordinarily throw away and turning them into something beautiful. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, give me a big thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any future videos. Remember, this is part of a playlist that was hosted by Casey and Heidi, so I will have that linked down below. Don't forget to head on over to their channels and check it out, as well as the other ladies who participated. Have a great day.